Now we got yeah, so one of the things that I would say to that is Kristen highlighted some really important things, and she highlighted what happens in private practice, and that's you know, much more autonomous, and you kind of get to make decisions. But many other stakeholders, especially in different countries around the world, if you have a national health system or things like that, oftentimes what they'll want to do is they'll want to see whatever intervention you're using on their recognized list. And one example of that is that in Wales, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, they maintain a list of certain interventions or treatment protocols that can be used. And they have included solution-focused brief therapy on that excellent care list. And so that is, so in your particular country, if you come from a country with that national health like that, you may need to advocate for solution-focused brief therapy to be put onto a list similar to that. Another example of that is in the Netherlands. They've done something similar to that. I'll post in the chat the link to where it is in the Netherlands. But Paul also mentioned the NICE. NICE is the UK's based system like that. And they also, and so you may want to look in your particular country to see if solution-focused brief therapy is on that list. One of the things that you might have to do is what Kristen and I have tried to help do here in the United States, is to get solution-focused brief therapy on one of those registries or on one of those recognized lists. It's beginning to spread more quickly as various countries kind of begin to rely on what they would consider evidence-based practices. So you might want to just look in your own particular country. But one of the other things that's really important, and one of the things that you might need to know if you're going to try to advocate for it, for solution focus to be added to a list like that, is what do they need? What are they looking for in order to add that to the list? And typically what they're looking for is a variety of different points of evidence. And one of the points of evidence that they will look for, which can originally sound kind of counter to solution-focused brief therapy, is a treatment manual. And they'll need to see, in essence, has this been manualized? Is there a typical protocol that you need to follow or that you can follow, so that we as evaluators can say, are you going to be able to do this the same way each time, right? Will everybody who gets this kind of care, they get equivalent care? And there are 2 treatment manuals that exist out there that you can get. And one of them is from the Solution Focused Brief Therapy Association. And it's a free treatment manual for working with individuals that you can download off of their website, which is just sfbta.org. And so you can easily download that, and you can use that wherever you want. The other is the Briefer Treatment Manual, which comes from Brief in the United Kingdom. And in order to get that treatment manual, you have to contact Brief, Chris Iveson, Evan George, or Harvey Ratner. And you can get that treatment manual by contacting them. And so one of the things that you might need in order to advocate either at an agency level or at the national level for this to be recognized is they might say, we need to know what this looks like in a standardized way. So you may need that treatment manual. The other thing that you might need in order for this to be recognized by either, again, by an agency or by a larger government association, is you might need to show them actual empirical research studies that show this actually works, right? And so you might need, in order to do that, to give them actual articles that have been published, peer-reviewed articles. I noticed in the chat that Paul also said Alistair MacDonald maintained a list through 2017, and the European Brief Therapy Association and the Solution Focused Brief Therapy Association in North America both have copies of this list on their websites. So again, that's a place where you can go and you can see all of the different empirical studies that have been done with different kinds of populations, with different kinds of presenting issues. And so you might be able to use that list or particular studies from that list in order to help your organization or your government to be able to see this does actually work. And so those are some points of evidence. The third thing that I will mention that you might use as a point of here's evidence that shows this works is an edited book by Cynthia Franklin and a few other people that's called Solution Focused Brief Therapy, a Handbook for Evidence-Based Practice. And that takes, so it's a hardbound Oxford University Press published book. And the reason why I mention that is because Oxford University Press is a pretty good publisher, and so that adds clout to this. But basically it walks through all the different types of evidence and the research that exists that might help convince whoever you need to convince that this is useful and that it works.
Did you want to add anything else, Kristen?
I will just say that the articles that appear on that list are often not free. So one thing you can always do, and I know this, and when I tell students this, they always are a little bit hesitant of it, but you can always email the authors and ask for a copy. People are flattered that people are reading their articles. So if you just Google the author and email them and say, hey, I noticed this article, would you mind sharing it with me? More than likely they'd be willing to send it to you. I get those emails often and I'm happy to share the information. So that's another way to sort it, because sometimes articles can be $50 to $70 to purchase. So going through that route might get you to a place where you're not spending a lot of money and getting these articles.
Yeah.
Also, I think one of the things in the solution focused community is people are very generous with their information and are very helpful and willing to share, which is, you know, I don't know about other communities of therapists, but this one is particularly generous and quite impressive that way.
Yeah. One other thing that I will say is Brigitte, who is here on in this meeting, she also helped to translate that treatment manual, the SFBTA treatment manual, into French. So if you need it in French, Brigitte did a wonderful service. And also Carla Gonzalez-Shute, she helped translate that same manual into Spanish, so that SFBTA manual is available in English, Spanish, and in French.
So our first question is sort of directing you externally, saying, you know, what are you going to be able to show to your external sources, you know, that solution focus is evidence-based. So we wanted to start externally and then move more into the practice. So our second question is how can solution-focused brief therapy clinicians use research to inform their own practices in a meaningful and user-friendly way? So how can we use this research and how can it influence us? And I mean, some of you may already have done so. And I'll start with Kristen. And, you know, what are the kinds of things that you think of about the research and how it's influenced you and how you practice?
I'll just use the explanation that I use when I'm describing this in the classroom. So articles that you read, and I'm going to specifically talk about journal articles. So journal articles that are published have different intentions. And the way I differentiate them is there are what we call empirical articles. And for those of you that may not be familiar with the term, those are articles that have collected data in some way and made sense of that data. And then there's theoretical articles. And these articles can come from clinicians, they can come from academics, and they're articles sort of outlining and identifying an underlying theoretical idea that they have about a concept. So there's a good example of an article about solution-focused brief therapy and hope and the relationship between the two. And that's a theoretical article. So there was a literature review completed, and then there were conclusions that were drawn about solution focus. And those articles are very, very, very important because as a clinician, they can really get you thinking about a concept that you may not have considered before. However, these articles are not intended to make generalizations about a population. They're more or less a way to bring insight and give you thought and consideration about whatever topics are included. Now, empirical articles, there are a number of different ways that can be done, and I see qualitative research was mentioned here. And in going back to the first question and sort of what Adam highlighted, when you are using articles to show evidence that solution-focused brief therapy is effective, you need articles that have looked at the effectiveness or the efficacy of the model. So did the model work with this population, or did this model work with this population? And a lot of times that's comparing solution-focused to another intervention. So like solution-focused compared to CBT. So those articles, which you often maybe hear the term randomized control trial or experimental research design, those articles are specifically looking at whether solution focused caused a change within the client group that was significant and important and, you know, led to some level of improvement. And those are the articles that these registries look at and that sort of thing. Now in qualitative research, these articles tend, and it depends on who you're talking to, so there's a debate within the research community about it, but they tend to not be as generalizable. They sort of are closer in line to the theoretical articles. So they're building on these new innovative concepts that we don't really know a lot about, but they're wonderful and they give us a lot to think about. And so generally in the research process, you can start out with qualitative research, and in qualitative research you can be building a theory or an idea or something, or trying to understand the context of a population. And then once you've gathered that information, you can continue to move and go into a more quantitative experimental sort of design based on what you discovered. So the research process from the beginning to end could start with that qualitative piece. Now, as a practitioner who's consuming this information, it's just very important to differentiate between what is something that you can apply to all of the clients that you see all the time, and what is information that you're reading and consuming that's giving you food for thought and something to think about and consider because that's an idea that someone else had. So making that distinction can be very important in the practice setting.
Adam?
Yeah, I think clearly what I would also say is Kristen knows all about research, and any question you have, you should go to Kristen first because she knows everything there is to know. What I would add to that is one of the things that Kristen kind of highlighted and talked about is what we would typically call outcome research, right? So what was the impact of this kind of intervention, in this case, solution-focused brief therapy. So when someone comes to therapy, what impact does that have? What's the outcome? And there's also a kind of research that's called the process research. And that process research is looking at, in essence, what's happening during the intervention that might contribute to the outcomes that you get. And so there is some process research that's basically saying, you might have heard in this community a lot about microanalysis, right? So microanalysis, in essence, is process research because they're looking at, during the actual conversation, what's happening between the therapist and the client. How is language used and those kinds of things. So it's not looking at what's the impact of this, but it's looking at what's happening during this time. And some of the value of doing process research, in essence, is it's making us evaluate, is what is happening in the room, is it consistent with what we say should be happening, right? If we say a solution-focused brief therapy session should include things like collaboration between the therapist and the client, that change happens at the language level. We should be able to see those things happening at the process level. And so one of the benefits of process research is to say, is it actually happening the way that it's supposed to be happening? And again, as practitioners, as consumers of that kind of research, I think there's two benefits of that kind of research. One is that it helps us to have a more clear understanding of when we read those books written by Steve and Insu that are about, this is what solution focused is, it helps us to know, how does that translate into the room? What do we actually see when those things happen? But I think also a second, and I would argue probably a more important part of process research, is that it helps us to ask ourselves, am I doing that? Do I attend to language that closely? Do I look at presuppositions in that way? When I ask the miracle question, am I doing it like that, or am I doing it in some other way? And so I think it helps us to take kind of what's written in the books, and it helps us to evaluate, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And one of the things that I would say about process research is a next step for us is to pair it with outcome research, right? So we say, when therapy happens in this way, does it make a difference to the outcomes that Kristen was talking about? And I think that's one place where we don't have much research or any research at all at this point. And so for all of you who are practitioners, one of the things that you can start doing on your own, again, kind of going back to what Beverley was talking about when she quoted Hey Sun from this morning, is that we can look really closely at our own practice, and we can say, if I make one small tweak, or if I'm really intentional about this specific thing, does it change the outcomes that I'm getting with clients? And so we can each do, in essence, research on our own clinical practices and say, if I'm really intentional about this, does it make a difference?
So listening to especially this latter part about the kinds of things that we can do in our own offices to see what makes a difference. For myself as a clinician, and I was asked to be part of this research, part of it was for me to think, what is it that's going to make a difference for me in my office that I want to know, that I might want to work on, that I can't do on my own because I don't have the APA version, and I need someone like Adam to kind of organize it and set. What was the kind of research? You did a literature review, right? Mm-hmm. Is that what we would call it? It's not process and it's not outcome.
Yeah, we did kind of a content analysis.
A content analysis. So one of the things as a practitioner that I really wanted to know is what actually does work, and what has been said that works, and what is all good therapy? What does all good therapy do? And so that was one of the things we wanted to discover, because one of the things I noticed is that a lot of solution-focused practitioners seem to have trouble talking about what they do when they work in organizations. And even if you manage to get the brief manuals and everything, the other thing that has to happen is you need to be able to talk to your coworkers in a language that both of you could understand. And one of the articles I read by Goldfried is there very little consensus in our world of psychotherapy. And what would it be like if we had more consensus and we could all kind of talk more of the same language by talking about the same things, knowing what's really important. So in some ways, sometimes you can say, what am I missing in my practice, and what do I want to know more about, and how can I start building on that kind of information? Do you want to say a little bit more about that, Adam, about what we've been working on?
Sure. Yeah, one of the things that I guess that I would say about that is oftentimes we get into the debate between solution-focused brief therapists and other kinds of therapists about what works or what we're doing or why we do what we do versus why other people do what they do. And so one of the things that we were looking at, in essence, is we went back to what is commonly called the common factors literature or the mechanisms of change literature, and said there are certain things that across modalities of therapy good therapists do, or good therapy looks like. And so one of the things that we tried to do is to say, how does solution-focused brief therapy kind of fit onto that? One of the things, and I see Alicia here, she talked earlier today about hope theory, and one of the really common mechanisms of change is engendering hope or increasing expectation for change. And so we had to look then in the literature and had to say, how does solution-focused brief therapy increase hope or increase expectation that change will actually happen. And then what that would hopefully help us to do is be able to talk to other kinds of therapists and say, well, this is how we engender hope, or this is how we hope to increase expectation. How do you do that? And where do we see overlaps? So instead of getting into a debate or an argument with other clinicians, or then in some sense, we can have a common language to use to say, this is what we do, and this is how we think it might be helpful to people.
Yeah, and there were like 7 principles of change that seemed to cross the board. One was expectations and hope, therapeutic alliance, tasks of therapy, use of client factors, therapist effect and self-regulation, and monitoring and process outcome. And there is a way of us being able to assess ourselves. We use the briefer manual to see how solution focus stands up to that and what we do. And then the language becomes much easier to share across. So I'm just excited because as a clinician, I've been working on this and we get to write it up. And so you may know other academics and you might have an exciting thing you want to do, and they may be able to partner with you and move your kind of curiosity forward. So before we go on to questions from you and other things that our panelists want to talk about, we wanted to ask an even more personal question, which was, how has solution-focused research impacted the clinical work of the panelists? And you may also want to think about that for yourself. What kind of research has really impacted you? And what difference has it made for the kind of work that you're doing? How has it changed your work? How has it caused you to kind of question what you do? How has it been useful for you?
Maybe I'll go first this time.
Okay.
I guess one of the things, and again, I've spent a lot of time doing process research and looking at those kinds of things. And I think one of the things that I would say about that is it has helped me to really be intentional about the language that I use. One of the things that I have kind of learned as I've really looked closely at how different therapists do solution-focused brief therapy is that solution-focused brief therapists make presuppositions, right? They embed presuppositions into their questions. And one of the things that I've noticed is that some clinicians make very small presuppositions, while other therapists make really big presuppositions. And I'll give one example about that. Many of you have seen the work of Elliott Connie, and he is somebody who makes really big presuppositions. He assumes, if you've heard him talk, he talks all about how there is a superhero in every single person. And he embeds that belief in a superhero in every single person in his questions. And so instead of asking, what would you notice that would be different, that would tell you you have more hope, right? He might ask a really, really big question, and he might ask something like, what do you know about yourself that lets you know you're the kind of person who could bring this about? And so embedded in that is you're the kind of person, you have something inside of you, you're going to help create this change. And you can hear in there layer upon layer upon layer of presupposition. And what that does is, I think, it builds this expectation that I'm going to expect a lot out of you. And regularly, as I've watched his work, I am amazed that clients just go along with it. And they start talking about themselves as if they are this amazing person. But he drives a lot of that because he embeds these presuppositions, big presuppositions, into his work. And so I think that's one of the things that I have started to notice about my own work, is that I'm more willing to make those presuppositions, but I try very, very hard to hold on to the language of the client when I make those presuppositions. And I think the best way to hold on to that language is to embed their best hopes into the questions over and over and over. I think sometimes we get their best hopes and then we kind of meander a bit. But I think when we can embed that best hopes over and over and over into their questions, we can make big presuppositions because we are constantly assuming that their best hopes is present and achievable, and that they're the kind of person who could bring it about.
Kristen, how has solution-focused research impacted your clinical work?
There's a 90% chance that we're going to be interrupted by a 3-year-old, and I very much apologize. It's almost bedtime here in North Carolina, so we're edging on the breakdown hour. But I will say that research has really helped me think about and identify different concepts such as resilience and hope that I would not have thought about and considered through, through different interactions with clients. I also the research has also really helped me consider and help people that I work with integrate solution focused in different ways. So not just in a therapeutic way, but through supervision with people in agencies. So we had a group here in Wilmington that ran for a number of years where supervisors were using solution focused with individuals that were working in the child welfare setting. So the research that comes out about the application and integration of solution focused into different spaces has been very useful in terms of sort of broadening my understanding when I'm engaging with others in ways that it can be applied within the community that I'm working in. So I know that's kind of a strange answer, but I at this point in my career, I end up spending a lot of time working with local organizations that have gotten really excited about solution focused, and then they want to bring it in. So for example, there's a organization here, it's called Link, and it's for individuals that have been released from incarceration. And the director of this organization loves solution focused down to his soul. I met him when I was giving a presentation a while ago. And so he has now since, trained all of his workers. So when I was figuring out, well, how can this be applied? I went through and looked at the literature and what had been written and what had been done around using solution focused with offender population. So that information can be very useful in informing application and training of solution focused in these different spaces.
Well, you also must have done it in a way that made it easy for them to integrate it, because sometimes when you go in it with a therapeutic language, it's pretty hard for people to understand or to kind of see how they can apply it. So you obviously did an excellent job.
Well, thank you. I mean, we here, when we train our undergraduate students. So in the United States, in order to be a therapist, you have to have a master's degree. So undergraduate students aren't necessarily trained in therapy. And so we train all of them in solution-focused practice. So there's a lot of great resources that we've kind of put into place to help build solution focused in a way that translates to people that aren't necessarily going into a therapy setting. Because I do believe solution focused can be used in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering, now I'd like to open it up to questions, and I'm wondering if you have thought about the way that you have used research in your own clinical practice that you might want to share with us and how it's been useful. There's not that many of us, so if someone wants to speak. Can you unmute?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's used any research?
I'll jump in here.
Okay.
Break the ice. I find also in talking to other people, the non-solution focused people, at first it's helpful to also draw upon other research that supports the elements of solution-focused therapy. One, about the Therapeutic Alliance, but also the research on goal setting. Lots of research on goals and intrinsic motivation and the research on self-determination, intrinsic motivation. I think all those support all the elements of solution-focused therapy. And then also the research on monitoring progress and outcome, you know, the work of Scott Miller and Barry Duncan, the feedback-informed treatment, and the scales that they have developed, how the research supporting that and how important that is. But I also have a question on those lines for the panelists, and that is about the usefulness of using scaling to as essentially an outcome measure to monitor progress and outcome. How does that correlate with other established outcome measures?
I think one of the things that I would say is, as far as research methodology goes, there are some limitations to using scaling as the outcome measure. Predominantly, and this is going to sound so counter to solution-focused brief therapy, so I'm just going to put that out there. But it is, in research, anything that's dependent on self-report, right? We don't know what's informing the client to answer the way that they answer. So we don't know if they are being honest. We don't know if they're just telling us what they think that we want to hear. And again, as I'm saying this, I know that that's very counter to the solution-focused premise. But as far as research goes, one of the things about using those established measures of outcome is that they've been tested on a wide range of people, and we know what the standardized norms are. And so we would know if a particular person is within the normal range or if they're outside of the normal range. And so as far as research goes, it might very much be impacting your personal relationship with that person, and it might be very useful for you to see change from one session to another session. So I don't want to exclude that for one particular person. But as far as outcome research, the research community would be a bit skeptical of using that as the outcome measure.
I'm gonna add something. I think that is a phenomenal question. And the thing about scaling is that, let's say we have a scale of 1 to 10, and I say 5 and Adam says 7. My 5 and Adam's 7, there's no way to compare because my perception of 5 is different than his perception of 7 and vice versa. So that makes it very challenging to make any kind of comparisons. But let's use Beck's depression inventory if you're measuring depression, because that seems to be a scale that we're probably all very familiar with. In Beck's depression inventory, we know if somebody's clinically depressed based on a score. You don't know that with scaling. So from a research community's perspective, you wouldn't have what we call valid and reliable information from a scaling question. However, that is a fantastic, phenomenal tool to use with a client. And that's what I tell students when I'm teaching them research. You know, if you want to show your boss or whoever you report to that you are making a change, a scaling question is not going to demonstrate that to them in the same way that you're showing that whatever behavior, the target behavior that you're working on has actually moved in the direction that you've wanted it to. So that, I mean, it's complicated, and there's also a lot of debate in literature around scaling and what that means. Like there's a lot of documented conversations that have taken place.
I understand that, but I'll come back to the feedback-informed therapy. You know, they use the outcome rating scale, for instance, which consists of 4 items, which essentially they're self-report, and they're essentially 4 0 to 10 scales. And before SAMHSA shut down the registry, I know their approach became established as an evidence-based approach. So I just put that out there. I understand the problems with self-report. Of course, I mean, they've done studies with lots and lots of therapists and clients in the U.S. and in Europe. So I just put that out there. If there's more that could be done with the 0 to 10 scale. Also, there's the literature on goal attainment scaling, which started being used in the 1970s in mental health, and that self-report, just a different version, different way of doing scaling.
Well, and it's interesting. I'm glad that you brought those two scales up, Gil, because I think there's a difference between using those instruments versus saying, you know, Adam, based on the work that we've done together, where do you fall? I mean, so that's a more of a standardized way of gathering information. And the outcome rating scale is one that has been widely written about, and it is a bit more standardized than just a general question that you would ask in a therapeutic setting. I've actually used that scale and the GAS in an outcome study that I did in Texas with Peter Lehman, who used to be at the University of Texas. And we've used those measures in research settings. So I think there's a very different sort of, I think there's two different ways to look at it. If you're talking about those measures, yes, those are used in outcome research, but just questioning in a therapeutic setting is different than applying those instruments and using them for outcome research.
Or how about using them together with a more standardized measure?
You mean asking scaling questions?
Scaling, and then with something like the Beck depression, and including in a research study, including those in an analysis.
Yeah, I think that can be useful, but I think that Kristen raised a really important point, and I think you'd have to, in some sense, qualify what that means, right? So you would almost have to do, that's a quantitative measure in some sense, but you would have to couple it with the qualitative data to say, when you pick 5, what does 5 mean, and how does that look to you? Because again, Kristen's 5 may be very similar to my 7. And the only way we would know that is with that qualifying data to go with it.
Okay, thank you for your comments.
Do we have any questions on the chat? Does anyone else have another question? And
Beverly, just so you know, Sara is here.
Oh, good.
So
great. Sara, your turn. Finish us off here, Sara.
Do we how many minutes do we have left?
We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay, just to make sure, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Sara Jordan, Sara Smock Jordan, and I'm the new editor of Journal of Solution Focused Practices. Sorry, I had a doctor's appointment, and anyways, running late, but I'm glad I could be here. So I wanted to just take a moment and tell you a little bit about our journal. It is a free open access journal, and we will be posting the previous JSFBT published hard copy versions of the journal on our website soon. I will, in just a moment, I'll let somebody else talk, but I will put the link for the journal website in the group chat. If you'd like to know more, I will also send you my email address in the group chat as well. If you have a research idea, a paper, and it would like to be an ad hoc reviewer, whatever your interest is, if you'd just like to know more, please let me know.
You have more time. If there's anything else you want to say.
Well, I just wanted to get the link in the chat before we ran out of time. So give me just a second. But if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask. I'll try to multitask.
Yeah, I'm sorry you didn't get a bit of chance to talk about the research that you're involved in, but at least you got here in time to be able to mention the journal, which is the home for a lot of research, which is great to have. It's a great journal. Really good. We're glad that you brought it back.
Yes, we are excited about it, and we are excited that it is free. It's all electronic. Our first electronic issue was just uploaded a few weeks ago, and we will have another issue in November that's coming, as well as back issues, 4 back issues from when it was JSFBT. We've changed the name from Brief Therapy to Practices, Journal of Solution Focused Practices.
So any other, from Adam, Kristen, any final thoughts? Thank you all for coming. We're actually going to try and end on time. So the next person that is speaking, is it a break, or are we moving right to something? I think Bridget is going to be speaking on resilience at the plenary. So I think that's right. Is that right, coming right after this? Sorry, I don't have my schedule in front of me.
Yeah, there is another one that starts right at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, so we want to make sure we don't get so far behind. So thank you all for attending, and all of us are available if you need to ask any other questions. And we hope you take this and get really excited about research and see where it leads you. So anything else? Anything from Adam or Kristen?
No, mostly just thank you for coming. I know that there are lots of things you could have chosen to come to. If you have any questions about research or how you might incorporate research into your own practices, feel free to reach out. We're happy to help.
And I echo that. Same. I love to talk about research, so I'd be happy to talk to anyone.
Me too. I put my email and the journal link there too. If you've got a great idea or something that's written up, we would love to send it out for review.
Okay, everyone, enjoy the next, I think there's one more plenary and 3 more workshops. One of them is from problems to solutions. One of them is Sophie from Mexico is doing something on restorative justice. And oh my God, what is the last one? Does anyone, and the last one is Becca is talking on the LGBTQ community. So that's in room 1 is Becca, in room 2 is from problems to solutions, and room 3 is Sophie from Mexico talking about restorative justice. So we'll see you all again, hopefully at the plenary and at our closing ceremonies when we pass it on to the Australasians.
Thank you all.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.